Hey, it's Brock here with Rock Hill Farms, and today we're going to talk about common failures on compact tractors and what types of failures are covered under warranty and the role that your dealership plays in getting those warranties covered. So, a tractor is a machine, it's a piece of equipment. Tractors break. Any piece of equipment at some point is going to break down or have a problem. And what you do next is important. So, the guy on screen with me is Jake. He's currently the owner of the tractor yard, but before that he was the service manager, and he spent a lot of time working in the shop repairing tractors, and he's got a mechanical engineering degree. So he's going to give us the dealer perspective on what the dealer's role in standing in between the customer and the company is. So I guess my first question, as someone who owns a dealership, you sell 3 different brands. What are some of the most common repairs that you see come into your shop on tractors that aren't 20 years old? You know, a fairly late model tractor. What kind of repairs are you seeing the most of?
Yeah, really there's only 2 common failures that come in for warranty work. One of those is emissions, and it doesn't matter which tractor you have, as long as it's over 25 horsepower, it has some kind of emissions control on it, period. So that's number 1. Number 2 is going to be front and rear axle seals, and that's every brand across the board.
So before we go into the warranty part of the conversation, I just want to say, from a tractor owner's perspective, kind of what are my responsibilities and what can I do to prevent those 2 failures? So
yeah.
with emissions, what can a tractor owner do to prevent that system from failing?
So emissions can be pretty complicated, and I'd say the number 1 thing you can do to help prevent an emissions failure on your tractor is learn how your emissions system actually works. What all emissions systems do you have? What components are there? Are there any wearable components? And I can tell you that I sell pretty much 2 different general buckets of emission systems. One, like the LS tractors, has a DPF, a DOC, some of them have SCR, EGR. They kind of run the whole gamut of emissions controls. So there's a lot going on there that can help you operate your tractor in a more efficient way, but it also creates more potential points of failure. So getting to know how your system works and what you can do as an operator to prevent a failure in your specific tractor is super important.
I like the sound of that. I'm also not very smart, and I don't know anything about how tractors work. So I'm going to tell you what I've learned from listening to viewers and talking to Jake, and see if I make any mistakes here, is that the best thing you can do for any tractor is run it hot. You want the engine to run at a high temperature. Obviously you're not overheating, but you want it to run at a high temperature. You do not want to idle your tractor and let it just sit there, or treat it like a side-by-side and putter around on it.
Yeah, so you're barking up the right tree. So what you're really after is higher exhaust temperatures. So you want your engine to be operating at normal, coolant temperature, normal operating temperature, but you want to make sure that when it's running, you're doing work with it. So minimizing the amount of time that it's just sitting there idling, minimize the amount of times you're just cold starting, putting around, stopping it. Those things are going to start building up soot in your DPF filter a lot faster. So keeping a load on your tractor and keeping the engine RPMs up and the exhaust temperature high is the number 1 way to just really prevent the frequency of regenerations and prolong the life of your DPF filters.
I can tell you on my TYM 574, I think I've got around 150 hours on it, and it's never done a regen. So, like my John Deere requires a regen whether you need it or not. It just does it. But I like that TYM's never done one. Something else I was told is if you're running your tractor hot, you're working it, and now I'm done. So I've just been, brush cutting. Tractor's hot. I drive it up into the shed and just shut it off. That's a pretty bad way to treat your emissions, that you want to let it cool off before you shut it down.
Yes, I don't think with the system that you have is a really basic. TYMs are really basic for the most part. DPF systems where it's just a filter and you're relying on the exhaust temperature and one valve. On those, I don't think it matters so much. Now, when you have a tractor that's got EGR, SCR, all the acronyms, yes, it's important to idle that thing down, let it basically go back to what I would say is ambient, let your fuel flow kind of stabilize, and let your EGR and all those valves cycle to where they want to be. Shut it off, and then that way when you start it back up, you're at kind of a normal level. You don't want to start up full throttle and throw anything off, or give your ECM any reason to trip over itself.
All right, next thing that you mentioned whenever I asked you was axle seals. Now, I make videos every day. I put out a ton of tractor videos, and every time you pick up something heavy, comment section is immediately, you're going to break your front axle. And you said axle seals. So I guess let's separate those two things. How often do you come in and you see a broken axle from lifting too much?
I would say it's not uncommon, but I would say that the amount of times we see a seal failure and not an axle seal failure is much higher, right? So,
or a seal failure but not an axle failure?
Right, yeah. Seal failure but not an internal axle gear failure or bearing failure. So, most of the time it's a front seal or it's a rear seal. Honestly, we see them both front, rear about the same frequency. And usually it's because someone's not ballasting their tractor right, or they're putting just a huge load on the tractor and tearing across the pasture, or they're leaving their four-wheel drive engaged and turning on hard surfaces a lot. That's the kind of stuff that puts extra strain on those seals. So just be very cautious when not using your tractor. Use it, load it, use the thing. But just make sure when you pick up a heavy load with the front that you've got adequate weight on the rear, because if you ever feel that rear end bouncing, you can kiss those seals goodbye if you continue to do that for very long.
Yeah, and just to make sure, I think most of you probably understood what he meant, but if you were to put all 4 tires of this tractor onto a scale and then you pick something up heavy and you pick up 2,000 pounds here, you're going to say there's 1,500 pounds on this axle, and you can measure that. But then you put weight on the back, then all of a sudden that weight shifts off of the front. And now that 1,500 pounds on that front axle is only 800, whatever the case may be. Yeah. Just throwing out numbers, but it's important that you balance it in a way that all that weight's not centered on that axle. But you pointed out something else, that the most likely way that you're going to damage that axle is to have a seal failure and not realize it or not do anything about it. So that's probably the next most important thing for your axles, is paying attention for leaks.
Yeah, pay attention. I mean, if you can park your tractor on concrete, clean concrete, that's how you're going to notice leaks the fastest. And they always look worse on your concrete than they really are, but you're going to see them quick, right? Mm-hmm. So, if you walk out and you see a drip on your front axle, don't ignore it. But also don't panic, because if it's just dripping, just keep fluid in it until you can get it in or until you can get it replaced. That's just practical advice.
So Jake and I have been talking a lot that we want to do a series of videos showing tractors being repaired so that you can understand what those repairs are like, and if you want to do those repairs yourself or bring it to a shop. So Jake's already published one on his YouTube channel that was replacing the seals around a PTO. And I'm going to do one soon with Jake on replacing front axle seals. And I think that's great content. And what I've learned from just having these conversations is that an axle seal, if you have a axle seal blow on this front axle here, it's not going to be incredibly expensive, and it's probably something the most tractor owners can do themselves.
Yeah, and typically that front axle seal, if it's within 2 years of you buying the tractor, it's probably covered under warranty. Now, the other piece of the conversation is I hear people worried a lot about the axle seal failures, especially on TYMs. I hear that a ton, which it's common on a lot of brands, but the main takeaway I'm trying to get at is this: don't let a front axle seal failure scare you away, because truly anyone can replace their front axle seal within 30 minutes to an hour, depending on your skill level. So, don't let that scare you away from a specific tractor that you like, because if that failure does happen to you, you can do it on your own.
So I want to cover some other potential failures on a tractor, whether or not some of these failures have turned into the boogeyman, where everyone's afraid this is going to fail, but in reality, they're not coming into the dealership broken. So I want to cover some other failures, but first I want to talk about warranty claims and the relationship the dealer has, and we'll start with those two issues. So if someone comes in and they've got an axle seal failure under their warranty time frame, is that likely to be covered?
Pretty much any time I've ever seen a front axle seal leaking and brought in within the first 2 years of someone buying a tractor, I don't think there's a single case where it has not been covered under warranty.
What about the emission system?
The emission system, which a lot of times those are extended to the powertrain term, which it could be 4, 5, 6 years. Almost all of those are covered under warranty. But the thing that you have to understand is, just because something is under a warranty period doesn't necessarily mean that it will be covered 100% of the time.
So let's talk about scenarios where I buy a tractor and it has a warranty and it breaks down and I think, well, I'm covered, it's under warranty, but maybe I'm not. So I'll let you, if you've got examples. I know of one example we could talk about that's a blown engine. Sometimes it's the tractor owner's fault, because as we're talking about different ways to prevent problems, you have a certain responsibility to do those things.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest reason for a warranty turn down is going to be just a blatant, obvious, owner abuse scenario, right? And we did have one of those recently that sticks in my mind, and we're actually making a video about that one. It's a 2515H TOM that had an engine failure in under 8 hours. And it is a case where the owner had to eat 100% of the repair costs. And that's a scenario where, the dealer could go to bat for the customer, and, those situations can be sticky. And that's a good time for you as a customer to understand the relationship between you and your dealer, and the relationship between your dealer and the manufacturer.
So let's say I get this new tractor, and if you guys want that story, you can watch Jake's channel. It's called The Tractor Yard. He's doing a long video where they fix this blown engine and they talk about what happened. But let's just go crazy and say I buy this tractor and I drain the oil out of it and then go out and drive it. So there's nothing that can be done there, and I come in and I start yelling at you. Or let's say it's on the borderline where there's a gray area. Maybe this is under warranty, maybe it's not. Probably my best bet is not to come in with an attitude towards you, because you're probably my best bet at getting that covered.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point to make, because there's plenty of customers, probably more than most would realize, come in just, bent out of shape, and they take it out on the dealer like we owe them something immediately. And, I understand the frustration 100%. You buy a piece of equipment, you get out in the field, you're using it, you're in the trenches doing whatever job you're doing, bam, it fails, and the first place you look to is your dealer. And that's where the frustrations come in. But what you've got to remember is that your dealer is there to help you. And if you can come in with a good attitude and just say, hey, this is the thing that happened, this is how it happened, what can we do about it? That kind of attitude right there goes a long way in one of those gray area scenarios where, maybe your drain plug was a little loose and all your engine oil came out. Whatever the case may be, some major failures happened. You don't think it's your fault, but there's not necessarily a way to tie it directly to a machine malfunction, right? Those are the kind of scenarios where me as the dealer, I have to come get the full story pulled together, do the research on the tractor, perform tests, get those together, present to the manufacturer, and then I have to weigh in and say, okay, I think we should make a special accommodation for this scenario, and this is why. So if you're one of those guys that came in and started screaming at me or my employees, I'm a little bit less likely to, really go to bat for you. And that's just how it is. So, be kind. Remember that your dealer and all of its employees are, they're human beings that you're dealing with, and be prepared to have your full story together, come in with a good attitude, and I guarantee you your dealer can really make a lot of things happen if they have a good relationship with the manufacturer.
So then another question is going to be about record keeping. Like, if I have an engine failure, do I need to have paperwork trails showing that I changed the oil?
That's a good question. It's a common one. So officially, it's always a good idea to keep some type of record. There has been cases where manufacturers have asked, has the maintenance been performed at your shop, or has the owner done it themselves? And to my knowledge, I don't think there are any specific manufacturers out there that I can think of that will penalize you for doing your own maintenance. Now, what does that mean if you do your own maintenance? How do you prove that you've done it? Well, try to keep your receipts for all the filters that you've purchased. If you don't do that, again, good relationship with your dealer. He's going to know if you've serviced it or not, and they're going to go to bat for you and say, yes, it's been maintained.
So I had an example in a video where I took a stance and criticized John Deere for not covering a warranty claim. Customer had a tractor with under 200 hours on it, and a wheel fell off and did thousands and thousands of dollars of damage to the tractor. And his owner's manual said to check those wheel bolts to make sure they were tight at 200 hours. He had the dealership do a 50-hour service. He hadn't hit 200. He had not been instructed. But there's also like a page in the book where you're supposed to walk around and visually inspect everything. And it's a gray area. And John Deere, did not cover that it was his fault that those wheels were loose. Those wheel bolts came loose. And those are situations where what you can do as a tractor owner is know that I need to be checking for things like that. And then it comes down to, that story that the dealer tells. And, I felt like that should have been covered, but I guess I can see it from both sides.
Yeah, I would say that's another tough one. I mean, we've had that scenario, I think only once that I can remember of, and it was a 20 series Branson, I believe. And this lady, she called in immediately upset. She said, y'all are the last people that worked on my tractor, and we never touched her wheels. We just, we did something. I don't remember what we did at this point, but I was like, man, we changed your oil. Like we didn't do any front end work on your tractor. But she was immediately just upset at us, and this needs to be covered. And it had been like 6 months since we touched this tractor. So, but yeah, I mean, how do you as a customer, defend yourself in a scenario where you had checked those bolts before, right? And really you can't, because your dealer is that intermediary. They're the mediator in this scenario. So whatever you tell them and how you act towards them is extremely important. And any documentation you can provide will help them and help you with the manufacturer.
So I have the most experience dealing with the service departments at John Deere. And I'll give an example of this that I think probably puts a bow on that story. Is I had loader bolts break. I think that's a common failure point on tractors. The bolts that attach the loader to the frame broke. And I noticed it when there was one broken bolt and 3 loose bolts. And I took it to the dealership, and they didn't charge me any service to repair those bolts and fix the tractor. But if I had kept going until all the bolts broke on that, and I had it up in the air, and it bent the frame, and the holes were so, reamed out that they couldn't just put new bolts in it, then at that point, I probably wouldn't have been covered. So it's my job to pay attention.
Absolutely. I mean, you have to be a responsible equipment owner, and a huge part of that's just doing a little pre-check every once in a while. Walk around your tractor and try to notice anything that could turn into a problem.
So if your dealer hasn't done it for you, walk around your tractor tomorrow and put a mark across your frame, your bolt head, and then onto your frame again on any bolt that's a large diameter that jumps out at you, that attaches your axle, your wheels, your loader, anything like that. And then it's a walk-by inspection.
Yeah, that's a really simple thing to do that will save you a lot of heartache, and it's just too easy.
Here's something else I hear all the time. I've got my tractor and I get a new attachment and someone says, oh, you're going to break your tractor with that because like it's a big stump grinder, or those things are hard on a tractor, right? So I'm wondering, how often does a tractor come in and they say it's shelled out, the PTO shaft's broken, or the internals of the PTO are broken because of that kind of impact? Or, I mean, is that a common failure?
So specifically, PTO shaft and PTO clutch failures, especially with low hours, are really rare because almost all of your PTO implements have a safeguard against putting too much strain on the system, right? And that's going to be your PTO shaft usually. So like the shaft connecting your tractor's output shaft to the input of the implement is going to have either a shear pin or a slip clutch. So those two things are going to prevent most, impact type failures, fracturing of the PTO shaft or breaking of drive gears. Now the PTO clutch, the part that's actually connecting the output of the engine to the PTO drive shaft out, that will wear out over time because that is a wearable item.
Like any clutch is an item that eventually wears out.
Yep, and there's different types of clutches for PTOs, but in general, it's probably going to be covered under your bumper-to-bumper warranty. If it goes out within that time, probably could be able to cover it, but there's going to be that question, how have you been using this?
So I'm going to try to catch something that you said there that is helpful to the viewer, is if your PTO shaft, if it has a shear bolt that keeps breaking, don't go get a stronger shear bolt to make sure it doesn't break.
Yeah.
If it has a slip clutch, like most people prefer a slip clutch, but if you don't maintain your slip clutch, like I'm not always keeping up with my maintenance, and if you don't maintenance your slip clutch, it's hard on your tractor. So those are the biggest things you can do for your PTO. And then a real life example I want to bring up to you is my tractor had 30 PTO horsepower, the John Deere, and the stump grinder I used was 30 to 60 range. So I was at the maximum, and I would kill the tractor with it. Mm-hmm. Do you think if I killed the tractor with the PTO implement, am I doing damage to my tractor? Or is that just something that happens?
Saying that you're doing damage to the tractor may be overstating a bit, but what you are doing is you're putting a lot of stress on the clutch, right? So if that system's rated for 30, then if you're doing work with an implement that's at the top of that range or over it, then you're putting more stress, more heat on that clutch, and so you're going to see it degrade faster. And that's just how that.
The harder you use it, the sooner it's going to need a rebuild, a clutch pack, or whatever the case may be on that.
Yep,
that's with anything.
The clutch is a consumable. I mean, that's the easiest way to put it.
If you drive it more, you'll wear out your tires too. Then the last one that comes to my mind that people say is if I'm pulling or pushing a lot, they say, oh, actually, there's another one. I got two more major concerns about breakage. People say if you're pulling, like I was pulling a plow, and you could hear the hydro whine because it grabbed too hard and my plow was more than my tractor could pull, that I was going to burn up my hydrostatic drive. But I'm in forums, I'm on YouTube, I'm in groups on Facebook. I don't really hear a lot of people talking about, well, my hydrostatic drive failed and I had to have it repaired or replaced.
Yeah, so we have sold hydrostatic drive tractors for 18 years maybe, and the only hydrostatic drive that we've ever had to replace was a manufacturing defect. So, that being said, you can burn one up. And, what kills most mechanical systems? Heat, right? So be mindful of how you're using your hydrostat, but, don't be scared if you hear a whine. If you hear a whine, know that you're generating more heat than normal. But, if you're just, like your example, if you have a ripper in the ground or whatever, and you're going from point A to point B 100 feet, don't worry so much about that. The tractor, if it's moving, it's handling it. But just think about heat. So if you're doing that all day long, you might burn something up. The other place to watch heat is obviously, your coolant gauge, your temperature gauge. So when you're putting that much strain that you're hearing that hydrostat whine, then you're probably putting a load on that engine too. So just watch your coolant gauge. If you've got a temperature gauge for the hydraulics, monitor that. As long as your heat level is manageable in a normal area, you're not going to burn anything up or wear it faster.
And the next one that I think is probably a real concern is you're going to bend your loader, tweak your loader, and that can really happen. So if I can pick up 2,800 pounds with the loader on that 574, that's a lot of weight.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say I want to pick up 2,800 pounds, and I hang 800 off this side and 500 in the middle and whatever. If I'm hanging 500 off this side and 1,500 off that side, and I'm driving around on bumps and stuff, I mean, do you see a lot of loaders that are bent bad enough or tweaked where they're no longer usable and have to be replaced? Or
yeah, I mean, honestly, it's pretty rare to see one that's mangled beyond repair. But I do see a lot that are tweaked, and it's because of those scenarios right there. Either they've got forks on, and they're picking up something heavy with one fork way out on one end, or it's usually just that unevenly distributed load. And if you look at how your loader is designed, I mean, you have all of this distance here, from your main pivot point off the tractor. So if you're putting every bit of load on that front corner, then this whole thing is twisting. And while it might handle that twist load as you're lifting it up in the air, if you then go take across the field, you're sitting there punching down on that corner and just actively twisting this thing. So typically that's what we see is a twisted loader, and it usually tweaks at this loader bracket. The only other loader failures that we see are really like bucket failures, or people just slamming into stuff, trying to use their tractor like a bulldozer, bending the bucket out, or every once in a while we'll see where someone has lifted something with a chain on one arm, and they've taken a lot of these have a bow in them, so sometimes we'll see people collapse that bow by lifting up with a chain or something. But
so here's my practical advice to help with that. If you're concerned about tweaking your loader, number one is what we already talked about. Always try to balance the load on each side. But also, when you're getting your machine, think, what do I frequently lift and what do I occasionally lift? So I made a big deal in my tractor search about having lift capacity so that I could pick up a 2,800 pound log, because sometimes I pick up a 2,800 pound log. But it's like, I've had the tractor almost a year, I've done that 4 times. You want a tractor that can handle the biggest thing you're ever going to handle, but if I was carrying 2,800 pound logs every day, that's not the machine for it. You don't want to be every day, all the time at your max lift capacity, or that's going to be hard on your axles and everything else. So, and also the same thing about, keep your ballast on, and then make sure you've sized a machine that's rated for it. And then I was using this as a demonstration. I was trying to use my tractor as a bulldozer to clear my rocky hill, and it's not made for that. That loader, I think the loader lift capacity is maybe less of a problem, as sometimes a tractor might have more ability to push forward than the loader can handle if you're trying to use it as a bulldozer.
Yeah. And something that I tell customers a lot of times, and I never try to talk people out of tractors because that's counterintuitive to my job, but a tractor is not a digging machine. You know, a tractor loader is not a digging machine. It's not a bulldozer. It's not an excavator. So don't expect it to be those things. The other thing people try to use them a lot for is as a forklift on hard surfaces. And, you know, while the tractor can do all of those jobs, sometimes if you're buying it for one of those purposes, you're probably buying the wrong machine. So just respect that a tractor is a tractor. It's very versatile, but it's not construction equipment.
All right, so I think this is probably a pretty long video, and we did the best we could to try to cover everything. But just be mindful, pay attention to your tractor, do your required maintenance, build a good relationship with your dealer. If you guys want to see more videos working inside a professional mechanic's tractor workshop at a dealership, subscribe to Jake's channel. It's called The Tractor Yard. I'll put a link in the video description. As for today, I appreciate you taking time to watch the video. I'll put links on the screen to a couple more of our videos, and I'll see you next time.